Hello and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past and talk about their impact and relevance today. I'm Tim Longo Jr., and I'm joined, as always, by a man who is the best man for the job, if that job is shooting blasters at space rocks.
Brett Duval. I'm not sure I'm the right man for that
That's
particular job.
That's the joke. You were not the right man for that
I
job.
was not. No, boy, you were the right man for that one. I was not. That was definitely a mouse and keyboard
in that
supremacy
case.
in that case.
Yeah. So welcome everybody, and welcome Brett. We do have a guest today that I'm about to introduce, and so I will get into that now, and he can correct me on anything that I get wrong. Our guest today is Ian Milham, a digital artist and director in many forms. And if I go all the way back, it looks like he started in the games industry back in 1995, working on something called Microsoft's WebTV, which I cannot wait to hear about. And from there to Crave Entertainment on a game called Shadow Madness. And then in 99, Ian moved to LucasArts, where we both met him. And he worked on such games as Star Wars Obi-Wan, Bounty Hunter, Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith as art director or lead artist in those roles at the time. And then after 5 years at LucasArts, he moved to EA, where he worked on the James Bond game From Russia with Love as environment art director. Then on to Dead Space in 2006, I believe, where he was franchise art director for 1 and 2 and half of 3. After moving to creative and art director on Battlefield Hardline, he was at EA for 11 years. He had a brief stop at Crystal Dynamics, and then he went back to Lucasfilm, rather, where he moved over to the film and TV side at Industrial Lights and Magic, known as ILM, of course, as virtual production supervisor on TV and film, on shows like The Mandalorian, Thor, Love and Thunder, and many others. So that's a lot. And before moving to film, he was in the games industry for 20 years, maybe more than 20 years. So, Ian, we would like to welcome you to the podcast, sir.
Thank you very much, Tim and Brett. Good to see you guys again.
Yes, yeah, it's been a while. And it's good to have familiar voices on. So. And thanks for coming on. I mean, like we talked about in pre-show, one of the things that we usually start with, just because I think listeners like to kind of hear the genesis and the early beginnings of people's career in the games industry. And I really do want to hear about WebTV. I don't remember what that
is. No idea what that is.
And the credit also is like you did both pre-rendered and real-time art for it, so that's like also amazing. But anyway, so how did you get into the business, Ian? What was your journey?
Well, it's like so many things for all of us. A lot of this is a matter of timing. I loved to draw and create art and all that, and everything like that growing up and all through time. And I thought maybe I was going to be a Disney animator. But and over my high school years, that's really when sort of like the new golden age of Disney animation sort of came about. That was right. So Little Mermaid came out my freshman year, and then every year was like another thing. And but my draftsmanship, like my drawing was fine, but not like animator good in terms of the ability to be on model and that fast and everything like that. But I knew that I wanted to draw for a living. I was not a fine artist. I was more of a craftsperson. Anyway, so I went to school for illustration. Still, like illustration board, colored pencils, paint, like computers weren't really involved. But then over the course of my college years, computers really started to be more of a thing for art. And especially that's when ILM started to break through with all of their visual effects work and everything. And I was super excited about that. So after graduation, I wanted to move in that direction. The problem is that really anything that was capable of really producing much was very expensive and hard to get and hard to get access to. So, in those years, it was deep 5 figures to get like an SGI machine and a copy of like Alias Power Animator, which was the precursor to Maya. It was more than, much more than a car, many more times than a car to get that. And so that was not happening. So really, I kind of tried to get every job I could that was remotely related to computer art. And so that was where Microsoft came in. So I'm from Seattle, and that's where I was. And I was just sort of networking to find out and get whatever I could. And when I started at Microsoft, which was really just a really pretty quick stop, honestly, web TV, like the web, was like really becoming a thing in 95 and 96. And Microsoft was exploring. Do you remember like Microsoft Bob and Microsoft Home and stuff like that? Right. And they were really trying to sort of get, in addition to their Windows business and PC stuff, they were trying to make sure that they didn't get outflanked when these technologies moved, to the living room or whatever. And so this is pre-Xbox. And what ended up happening was I got a job at Microsoft, really, sort of a glorified internship. And they were exploring how to put the web on a set-top box, like a cable box. And so we were coming up with projects and various things we could do that would sort of be interactable with our TV remote and either usable or playable. So like I made a 2D hand-drawn sort of let's call it an homage to Bomberman. Remember Bomberman for Sega?
Yeah.
Except this one was called Bad Bunnies, and it was like rabbits and going around a maze and that kind of stuff. All as sort of proofs of concept for Microsoft. None of this ever came out. All as proofs of concept for Microsoft for their web set-top box possibilities of all that. So that was my first experience with computer graphics. It was fine, and I was grateful, of course, for the work. But things really changed in 1996 for a couple of different reasons. Number one, in the lab at Microsoft was the first time that I saw a Sony PlayStation. And of course, moving to discs away from cartridges was allowed for so much more storage that the art really became a whole thing, as most evidenced by like Final Fantasy VII and the having pre-rendered backgrounds and everything. Even though the resolution of those backgrounds was 320 by 230 something, because you needed to save 32 pixels for palettes. So it was like, anyway, not a lot of space. So, but the other thing that happened was my uncle at the time was a doctor, and this woman came in to translate for her mother, and who was going to be a patient, and she had just moved to Seattle, and there was some, they just usual sort of first timer conversation.
Where is this story going?
Oh, it's gonna involve two big lies. So, anyway, it turns out that she and her husband had just moved up from the Bay Area. She worked for ILM and he worked for Pixar, and they were starting a remote studio. They were starting a studio in Seattle. And my uncle goes, well, hey, you're new in town, and I'm having a barbecue this weekend. You're more than welcome to come. And then and she accepts, and they leave. And then my uncle calls me and tells me, you're coming to a barbecue at my house because there's this woman I need you to meet. And if you got to excuse me, I need to go plan a barbecue, because the barbecue was a lie. And so he invited like a bunch more, like 20 more people, just to give cover for me to meet this person.
Wow.
And she had, she was starting a small studio. She had an SGI and various stuff. So that was my first access to pro level software, was sort of an unpaid internship at their new studio, which was basically, two engineers who ended up, they were the ones who were the running and writing Renderman for Pixar. And then this woman whose name is Annabella, and she was the artist in the group, and I was there. And so I would work door at Planet Hollywood at night, and during the day I would learn, the state of the art of computer software. Anyway, so that was my first. That's where I sort of started to be able to build some skills. And then the second lie was relating to that PlayStation and Microsoft. I don't know if you guys remember this, but there was a big controversy in the mid-90s with Squaresoft switching allegiance. They had historically been a Nintendo, right? All of Final Fantasy, everything like that was always like a Super Nintendo, whatever. And Square really disagreed with Nintendo's choice to go with cartridges for the N64. Square had a big office in Redmond, it to be next to Nintendo. And then when they switched allegiance to the PlayStation for Final Fantasy and everything at that generation, Square was like, well, we don't need this Redmond office anymore. So they closed it. But the engineers and the people at that team that didn't want to move back to Japan, or the people that had been hired there locally, were like, oh, okay, well, we'll start our own studio now. But they were mostly all engineers. So they needed a whole art team. And I don't know how the connection was made, but they hired Annabella to be their art director. And she said, great. Ian is my first hire. He works for me already. I pay him $45,000. Does that sound good? And they went, sure, that's fine. She was paying me nothing. But she lied to them. And so those are the two lies that kickstarted my career in game development. And
that's the name of the memoir, The Two Lies, right. That's the Kickstarter.
Right. And that game that we made ended up being Shadow Madness, which was a hoot to learn on and great. There was only 9 of us and we were doing everything. I think the end product is sort of, I'll sort of charitably describe it as charming. But what was great is I got to do all the different things. So pre-rendered backgrounds, effects, animation, real time, the whole deal.
Got it.
And really got to cut my teeth and learn a lot on that project. And then real quick, I'll the rest is history. But the thing that brought me to you guys was in November, and you'll know about this part, right? So now our game comes out, things that, whatever. And then in November of 98, two important things happened down in California, which was that Rogue Squadron and Grim Fandango came out. And Grim Fandango came out and set my world on fire. Because it was basically the same idea, pre-rendered backgrounds with a real-time character walking around and interacting lightly and doing stuff. But I loved the art and the world, and it just opened my eyes to the possibilities. And I ended up applying to LucasArts and came down right around then, hoping to work on something like Grim Fandango. And then Tim Schafer promptly left, and everybody left, and almost everybody left LucasArts as soon as I got there. Right, there was the big tribe that left to form Infinite Machine. There was the group that formed Nihilistic, and Tim's group. So like all the people that I didn't know you fellas yet, but all the people that I had come there hoping to work with all promptly were like, ew, and took off. But that created again more white space for me at LucasArts, where there was a whole new era and openings for people to contribute, and that turned out to be great for me. And the rest, continues on from there. So that's how I got started in game development.
I got saddled with the wrong Tim as well. So.
Oh, that was a good one.
Sure.
Even Tim gives me crap about that himself. That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, Ian, you're a great storyteller. Thank you. I love the intro there. That was great.
That's amazing.
And I still, ironically, I still remember some of the early days when you joined the company. I mean, loved hanging out with you and loved. We didn't get to work directly on projects together, but it was. I think you were a great addition to LucasArts at the time, even though all of your idols left as you arrived.
Right, and then they canceled. That was funny. So then they, I don't want to talk too much out of school, but I think this is all ancient history enough. They put me on what was basically Jedi Knight 3, but it kind of, it got overwhelmed in the prequels of everything and a little bit of a muddy set of expectations and timing and a couple of deep dives on features that didn't pan out. And so, and then the Xbox got announced, right? And so early, I'm trying to put the right timing on this. I want to say 01, maybe 2000. They basically scuttled that project, gave me the big box of parts and said, hey, you be art director. You're going to get a team of a few new hires, and here's a box of parts. If a game comes out of this at all, we'll be excited. And it was actually an amazing blessing, although it felt a little bit like a defeat at the time. It was an amazing blessing because it was like I couldn't fail. They were like, hey, be art director. We don't expect anything.
Yeah.
And here's a bit of a head start with some stuff. And it's going to be an Xbox exclusive. You've got 10 months, which is, of course, an absurdly short amount of time.
Yeah.
But, you know, the expectations were so reasonable, and the opportunity, if you really got under it, was still an Obi-Wan game. It was still lightsabers. Like, the fantasy was very compelling. There was all kinds of stuff there. And it really gave me the permission to learn and try as a new leader and as an art director there. That now I look back on and with a lot of fondness about what an opportunity that was. And so when I moved on to projects that maybe had a little more stakes, like Bounty Hunter, or of course then developing Dead Space and stuff, I had a chance to try and fail in a friendly environment that really set me up for later success.
Yeah,
LucasArts really was like that at the time. You know, it was because of all the turmoil, because .com was stealing a ton of people, because a lot of people had left. A lot of openings were, happening at a time when the studio needed to grow. So you became sort of senior really quickly, just because you were still standing. You were still there.
Right.
And so a lot of people got promoted into leadership roles, very early. I mean, that happened to me. It was my second game. I was a lead programmer, and it's like I came in as a senior programmer, having never written a professional line of code. So it was just a weird time.
I wouldn't recommend that as the way to.
No, it's not, I wouldn't either. I learned a lot on that job.
Sure.
All three of us, that I think we had similar stories at that era for sure. Myself included. And we definitely don't need to get into the weeds on it too much, but I will say, to your point on Obi-Wan, which a lot of people probably don't know, it's just, I think a book can be written about that whole journey for that game. And then when you and Dan Connors and Chris Ross and others came in to kind of do what you did, I agree with you. I mean, judge the game how you want as a user, but I think just the success,
which they should,
is
I mean,
yeah, they should, and that's fine.
Gamers should not care about what it was like to make it. That's fine.
No. But to your point, as a game development story, and being sort of on the periphery of that, and kind of watching all of you go through what you went through, and then, like you said, grab the bull by the horns and do what you could. It's pretty cool, pretty impressive, and like, wow, okay. And so your point, which we talk a lot about on the podcast, but your point about just those opportunities and having how challenges are just as important as, successes and things like that. Yeah. So that's a really good point about a foundational aspect of setting you up to succeed in the future. So, all right, well, so let's fast forward to EA maybe.
Mm-hmm.
And Dead Space, you had From Russia with Love there, of course, and so feel free to put in some tidbits on that. But obviously we want to get to Dead Space and sort of what I think we're very interested on how that production came to be, and we talked to Rosie last week, which you may know.
Oh yeah,
and yeah. So she came on last week to talk about level design. She just happens to be working with us at our company now, so we had a connection there. And so she told us some of her early days. That was her sort of first big. Dead Space was her first big game, so it was fun to hear her side of it too. But yeah, so what was the EA phase like, and how did Dead Space come to be for you?
So EA then was very aligned on and really successful at, I felt like, now video games are commonly thought of by video game makers and just whatever as like blockbuster entertainment and akin to giant movies and stuff. But that was kind of a novel idea in that time in the early 2000s. And EA was really like, the PlayStation 2 was exploding in size. And EA really was doing a lot of licensed work, polishing the absolute hell out of it and making really compelling stuff. I think probably one of the biggest sort of inflection points was the Two Towers. So the Two Towers came out while I was at LucasArts and while we were making, and really influenced us on our making of the Episode 3 game.
Yeah.
And a lot of that Two Towers team ended up going to EA. They made Everything or Nothing, which was amazing as a Bond game. I think, too often forgotten. And then I went there and we made From Russia with Love. And, but simultaneously then it was like, they made Lord of the Rings Battle for Middle Earth and a lot of sort of high profile, big time licensed games that were very, very successful. And that was sort of their MO when I got there. And that was fine. I was really appreciating learning and really upgrading my craftsmanship. But a lot of people there were really sort of starting to kind of grind their gears under the yoke of annual development and licensed product. There were all sorts of weird rules. This is the height of sort of stylized Bond. There are no bathrooms in James Bond world. There's no headshots in From Russia with Love because the Bond people said Bond would never do that. And there was all kinds of stuff that was, whatever. So here's where I'll give a ton of credit for Glenn Schofield, who now runs Striking Distance and just came out with Callisto Protocol, where he really created the space for Dead Space to happen. You got to remember, EA, at least EA Redwood Shores, where we were all developing, had not launched a new IP since Road Rash. So that was 15 years when we were trying to get Dead Space approved.
Yeah, it just wasn't their thing.
No, just wasn't their thing. And Glenn really leveraged his whole sort of status and career there and was basically like, give me a chance to make something or I'm leaving. And they were like, fine. But it was like 15 people. We had very little time and it needed to prove itself right away. So almost all of that team came from the Bond and Lord of the Rings lineage. So excellent, excellent craftspeople. And if you look underneath it, really the DNA of Dead Space was survival horror is a popular genre, but really doesn't have that many iterations. Like one comes out every couple of years. Resident Evil 4 being the obvious big recent hit, but also felt like here's a genre that has a lot that is popular, but has some space for innovation. Mm-hmm. It has some sort of Japanese peculiarity and kind of similarity that is awesome. Nothing, it shouldn't change, but it felt like, we could kind of maybe play here as well.
There's a lot of open space. Yeah.
Right, a lot of open space. And it hewed really well to the skills, the gameplay skills and the level design skills that we had built over the Bond games. Third-person shooting, action set pieces, that kind of stuff. And so we're like, here's something we could make that we have the skills we think to make. We could get something stood up pretty quick. Our engine already kind of can do this kind of thing. And, we're all set here. So, but I would say the driving attitude of early Dead Space was just total paranoia because it was us. The development slate was us, The Simpsons, Godfather, and Lord of the Rings in the studio at that time. So 3 of the 4 are contractually obligated.
Yeah.
So even if we did a pretty great job in our early development, we could get canceled just so they could take our people and use it to finish one of those other games that goes a bit pear-shaped. So we knew that pretty quickly we needed to have evidence that our game was a lot further along maybe than it really was and uncancelably good in terms of its demonstration of potential. So I've never been on a team before or since that hit the ground running so hard right out of the gate. And we tried to make something scary like within 2 weeks. Failed spectacularly. And actually we learned a lot about how difficult it is to make something scary and how much iteration was necessary because we'd make something, I don't know, some tentacles would jump out at you or whatever. This is all just Bond with an art skin on the original Xbox. And it would just be like funny and clumsy. And then it would be, and then it would still be funny and clumsy. And like, horror, like humor, is all about timing, and we would just do it, and we had to do it like 20 times. And then finally you were like, actually, this is kind of moody and scary now a little bit. This is cool. But it also taught us, like, man, we're going to need to do everything 20 times to get to a quality result. So we need to get going right now. And also we need this thing to look like. So like at the end of 6 months, we had like a quick little demo where we had a few key features like 0G. You could turn the gravity on and off or whatever. Very primitive, all still done in the Bond engine, which was really sort of warmed over renderware. And on the original Xbox, you know, but it kind of had a tone. But we also had a calendar, a poster, key art, all these trailers that we had made like a clip reel of horror movies and stuff that kind of showed the tone in a trailer and all this kind of stuff. I still have all these old materials, and it really was a compelling. Like the vision was super clear, even though we ended up evolving a lot from it. Very, very early, because EA, right? It's a ton of executives who don't have a lot of imagination. It's kind of their job to not have any imagination and to want proof. And we were just like, we're totally going to get canceled, dude. And so we needed to have something right away. And it really taught me a lot about the necessity of working together to prove your stuff or to get things out, and iteration. No matter how you could do it, we had a whole separate, like, Dismemberment only worked on the PC, but no one waited. Like, we had a PC demo that only did Dismemberment, where you could shoot the arms off of an alien, and the alien would then change AI decision tree and states based on what you did to it. And but it only worked on PC. It didn't look good at all, but it proved that one bit. But someone got started on it right away. And it really taught me a lot about the power of all those things. And so, you know, we were sort of off from there. And there was never really like a big green light moment. There was never like okay, you guys can make this game. We always felt like we were going to get canceled up until like a year before it came out. I think maybe we started to be like, okay, they're going to let us finish. That's cool.
Wow. That's
crazy. So you went from there.
Developing under that stress.
So basically you were living survival horror.
Yeah, it was. I mean, the whole time. But also we decorated the hell out of our area of the floor. We had a TV running horror movies all day in the pit. Nice. Posters and signage and concept art and like I must have spent my salary in printer ink. The company, you know how there's like there's like a head per head cost on the company sheet, which includes like the rent and the benefits and the food or whatever. And it's, you know, so whatever you cost the company is a lot more than your salary. I must have counted for triple just based on, we had a plotter with ink, and I must have burned so much ink making promotional materials that then I would hang everywhere, all the time.
That's super cool. I mean, it gives the whole team like the gestalt, right? You know, like, you know, because one of the things Rosie said was that you all just kind of knew what the game was, you know, and you were that there was a real sense of vision for what the project was, and everybody just kind of understood it. And it sounds like part of that was the environment that you were building up around the team.
Yeah, it wasn't anybody's. You know, we were also, I think, the alchemy of the different constituent people was really unique in terms of their work products, and the blending just sort of like you got it right off the bat. And then it wasn't the sort of the side effect of knowing we constantly had to broadcast and communicate to an outside the dev team audience, executives, the rest of the stuff. We wanted buzz. We wanted people from Europe, other EA studios. We would mail them posters and they'd be like, what the hell is this? We wanted people all around the world of EA to know that this thing was going. So again, there was this peer pressure to not cancel it. But the side effect of always having to communicate to an outside audience is that we got real good at communicating to each other. And that all that stuff was around for us too. And it was a forcing function that what Rosie's talking about in terms of what is this game about? What's it going to look like? All that kind of stuff we were soaking in it all day. And it became really really clear. It was in no like creative director's head or no one person's design doc or anything. It was on the walls. It was in the stuff. It was in the monitor over there that was always on. It was in this demo or that thing, and you could kind of just sort of know it from that.
Yeah. Wow. So then nobody had worked on a survival horror before? Nope. It was just sort of like you saw the space and you're like, let's go that direction kind of thing?
Pretty much, yeah. No, it was a business decision. I mean, we were fans, but no one brought any specific, I don't think, history. I don't want to, I could be mistaken, but I don't believe that anyone had worked on anything specifically like that. No, we had game making skills that lent themselves well to it. Yeah. And like we had, I think compared to the rest of the industry at the time, we had a lot of very good craftspeople, especially on the environment side, right? All that licensed work, sure. Lord of the Rings, all that kind of stuff. We had very good craftspeople. So we had the kind of people, you're right. What are the key ideas of survival horror that we kind of coalesced around in our early development? One of which was the world is gameplay, that mood and the world is, in some cases, you would have a room with, quote, nothing in it from a gameplay perspective. No enemies spawned, no nothing. But that was still critical gameplay, the tentative exploring, right? And you're looking at the world with a flashlight. So that world needs to hold up. And so a team that was capable of executing really good environment art that's withstood withstood scrutiny over time. I think we were well positioned to take advantage of that, that kind of stuff. So our skills lent themselves to survival horror, even if our history wasn't in that genre.
Well, I guess to echo back something that I think is pretty, not to overstate it, profound to me though, is I think you're giving a lot of credit to Glenn, which is great as far as providing the space for this to happen, but the lesson for me there, which we do talk about from time to time, is thinking about the team you have and the team that the team that you want and that you want to come and combine together to make something. And what you don't often, in my experience, you don't often get the chance to ask that question and to really sit down and think, okay, what is the space we should enter and what can we do well? And having those things all come together well, and Glenn giving the space to allow that to happen. Because like you said, oftentimes there's contracts and there's ROIs and P&Ls and all of those things, right? And it's like people are resources that are shifted around and moved around, and it's what the business needs, not what the team can do or what the team should do, or what they're inspired to do. And that, that's sort of, you see that kernel, you hear that kernel, and you're like, okay, I can see how a classic game comes from that, because that genesis is so important in that way.
I'm a huge. Oh, go ahead, Brett.
I was going to say, I've been reading this book about Ikigai, the Japanese concept of how to have a meaningful life, or a joyful life, I guess. And it's combining the things, the intersection of what you love, what you're good at, what you can be paid for, and what the world needs. And that is what I'm hearing in the description of this project is, you saw a space where there was, where a game could be, you all were good at doing this and were obviously getting paid for it. And it was a thing that you loved as fans, right? To me, that sounds like the right mixture to make a game like this.
I'm a huge believer, and it's especially, in my more recent work, which has been, on stagecraft and making movies and that kind of stuff, where teams are operating in real time. But it all came from game development too. I'm a huge believer in team casting. That just because someone has a title or they're good at a thing doesn't mean they're the right thing necessarily for this, and that the great teams are complementary. So what happened? Like I was the art director on Dead Space 1 and 2 or whatever. But if we are truthful, right? Like as I said at the beginning of this, I'm really more of a craftsperson than a visionary. I'm not amazing with a blank sheet of paper, And my my own visions tend to be, I think, good. I'm really good at sort of being an audience proxy. I'm really good at developing and directing. But, if I'm honest, my vision is a little basic. I don't come up with weird stuff. I don't come up with weird, compelling stuff. In that kind of like, what the hell is that kind of thing. But what happened on Dead Space is like, man, I'm the art director of this thing. I don't have a lot of time here. We need to get something compelling. And I am good about looking at something and going, that's not cool enough. That's not, interesting enough. What are we doing here? So what ended up happening is on that team, our VFX artist, whose name is Ben Wanat, who's continued and now goes, and he's a very high up at Sledgehammer. Man, can that dude make weird stuff? Too weird. He's got very specific taste, incredibly atmospheric and weird and repellent. He's really the visionary behind the necromorphs, but like left to his own devices will make stuff that's way like too weird for kind of a mainstream project. Kind of like, what the hell am I even looking at? But he and I together made a potent team because he weirded things up, and I pulled him into a more like mainstream, readable place. And then the other two factors in sort of the Dead Space cocktail of its weird vibes and art and compelling nature were Chiwai Lau, who is a concept artist and an artist in general, who does incredibly intricate technology, really intricate, detailed pencil drawings of all kinds of interesting technology with different sort of shapes and stuff. And he was really the DNA of the suit and of the weapons, the tools, plasma cutter, all that kind of stuff. And again, his stuff was so intricate and sort of very Eastern influenced, lots of sort of Gundam and manga and that kind of stuff, that it was amazing. But I could sort of pull it into, again, a little more of an elemental shape language, something that was a little more relatable and everyman. And the combination there was really interesting. And then the wild card was John Bell, who they kind of didn't know what to do with at the studio, but has a sort of out of time, optimistic tone to his work. And I thought it was like, man, your stuff does not fit with what we're doing at all. Trivia, also, John Bell came from ILM, and he designed a lot of the cool stuff from Back to the Future. He designed the hoverboard. He designed he designed the gates and the trucks from Jurassic Park. So the kind of bold color and optimistic tone of that kind of stuff, I was like, boy, they kind of said, hey, here's John Bell. Can you use him? And I thought, well, his stuff is the opposite of scary, and it kind of doesn't work. And I went, oh, wait, let's turn that bug into a feature. What if John did this sort of contrasting grace note over everything? And so he ended up really, although a lot of the final art necessarily wasn't his because he was doing the concept, but he would just create sheets of weird signage.
Yeah,
all the stuff,
the propaganda stuff,
right? Exactly. And so I did a bunch of stuff that was basically based on like OSHA signage and lots of safety announcements. But the ones that are like, tomorrow is a good idea, and it has like a scientist looking in the future, or like he's the one who came up with Peng, where he did like there's always Peng, and it would have this sort of coquettish woman smiling, and I was like, John, what the hell is that? Like, what is Peng? And he's like, I don't know. And and I was like, that's incredible. We're never explaining what Peng is. I love this moment. I want players to have the same moment that I just had. And so me being this sort of ringmaster, but really figuring out how these odd shaped Tetris pieces could form a line, right? We got the long skinny one, we got the cross one, we got the square. And sort of this one is too technological. This stuff is too weird and off-putting and gross. And this stuff is this like weird 50s kind of overtone to everything. And then I would make my meager artistic contributions. Together, we made an amazing cast that had a really unique point of view and a fun kind of put together. And I think that's the part that people kind of miss. And in some cases in their, in trying to recapture the magic, I think, that's sort of what's been missing in some cases, has been that kind of weird alchemy that happens when different people get together and do stuff.
It's hard to get too. I mean, you do, there is a sort of identification phase of what, like you just described to us, and went through each individual and sort of how you all could see each other working together, and that's very hard to do. It's very tricky.
And sort of like, and what we learned from there is like, so Ben was incredible at environmental lighting, and that was also, and we reorganized our complete development process basically based on what he could do. So one person laid out all of Dead Space artistically, and he just kit bashed everything and lit it. And because what we learned was the lighting was more important than any other part of the process, and we needed to get things lit before we even textured it, before we even made it watertight or anything like that. So I think one of the things that people misunderstand about art direction or any sort of leadership position in game making is that, yes, there's a certain amount of leading the team that does that discipline, and you guys can speak for in engineering and design, but from an art perspective, what I found is, as art director, maybe more than half my time was spent with non-artists, right? Mm-hmm. My time was spent representing, defending, and nurturing their work against all the slings and arrows of the rest of the development, so that it could eventually become what it was going to become. So in that case, it was like, lighting is very important. We need to build this and light it before we even make it like watertight or streamable or any of the things that design needs or engineering needs for it to work. And a lot of my job was just sort of getting the rest of the team to back off long enough for them to do their bit. And then it became self-evident, like, oh, that looks amazing. We need to keep it like that. But now there was the unglamorous months of retroactively going back and making it performant, making it streamable, making the gameplay work, all that kind of stuff. And it was a real interesting stuff. And that's served me ever since. That idea of like, that the discipline lead is really the sort of cheerleader and representation of that discipline to the non-other parts, the partners of that discipline, just as much, if not more, than they are the leaders of that. The art team knew what they were doing.
Yeah. They
needed leadership, they needed help, but like, they didn't need me in there, as a tech artist, sort of scrutinizing their shaders or helping them be craftspeople. I was available as I could for that, but really they needed to not have to do anything twice. They needed they needed their time to be respected. They needed their stuff to work because someone had gone ahead of time and negotiated and worked with the engineers, or vice versa, right? Maybe an engineer has an incredible rendering trick or something like that they were excited about developing, and the art direction needed to honor and surface that work, right? So a big part of Dead Space was deferred rendering, which was a big deal that came out at the time, sort of across the board. And without getting too into the weeds of the what deferred rendering is, it basically made it so active lights were and point of view light sources were really powerful, and we could do a ton of them. What we couldn't do is big washed shadows across the whole world. And so it was my job to integrate what is a look, what is a vibe we could do that really just blows the shit out of deferred rendering and makes it really stand out and makes it awesome. And to sort of take this gift from the engineers and make sure that it surfaces. Because so much in game development, someone invents something really cool or adds a really cool thing. It could be a game mechanic. But then like, it's kind of too late in the process to go back through all the levels and really integrate that game mechanic and glorify it as it deserves. And you're kind of like, oh, that was cool, but they don't do it enough. And so that kind of felt like, oh wow, this is a thing that needs to be a bigger part of our DNA. Let's go for it. That was more my job.
Yeah, I mean, and that's, I think it's a wonderful distillation of that leadership role and many leadership roles, that there's a diplomacy that takes up a lot of your time, and you're making sure that the wheels are greased, but that everyone understands what each other needs, and I think that's what the leadership team all up needs to do that together as well. And let the team, don't muck about, let the team do what they need to do, and you just the air coverage or what have you. And Rosie also mentioned some lighting. She had some points about lighting as well, and how important it was, coming from a level design perspective, and so it's good and interesting to hear you both bring that up. And I know I was fortunate enough to meet Ben at one point at EA. You introduced me to him, and I could tell, when you say that he kit bashed the whole compositionally kit bashed the whole essentially game, that makes sense, because there is such a one word we came back to during the series time and time again, or at least I did, was there's just a cohesiveness to the game, and I don't just mean environment art and environment layout, but just like the way the characters is set in the world, and how the Ishimura and Isaac feel like they are complements of each other. And then your point about the propaganda and the sort of like the signage, I feel like in any good survival horror game, but even horror movies, that contrast of those types of things, they always, Bioshock did a great job of it, of course, as well. They always are like, they're important, because if you just had horror all the time, right, and you had none of that contrast, and so you finding Bell's, like you said, slot that he fit in, and found Pang and things like that, it's like, I think that's important for this to work.
It is. I mean, yeah, Ben is definitely he's a clear blue flame. That dude, he burns bright and is quite a contributor. Yeah, our theory with that stuff, and the thing that I was trying to do with the signage and whatever, is we don't have the time or energy to really show this place as it was. Yeah. And you don't, it's the same thing with the necromorphs and the world, and the epiphany that we kind of had about it is, if it's just all messed up, if you don't have a real understanding of what it was or what it could have been before it was messed up, there's really no pathos to it, or kind of, it doesn't land that hard. If you just find, like the thing that makes a picture of a bombed out city compelling is another picture of what it looked like before.
Yeah.
And the idea was, well, we're not going to come here when it was before. And so how do we imbue this world with some windows into what it was before, and the tone of it and the place it was? If it was just a grim place and then it got super grim, that's not that compelling. So you're trying to sort of put up like, oh, this was a bunkhouse and there were movies that showed on Tuesday nights and whatever, and you're trying to get that in as elegant a way as possible without making it like a cutscene or whatever. Yeah. And then the same thing,
that was something I picked up on and mentioned it in one of the episodes, was just that it felt like a real place. And even if I in that way, when we experience games, there's definitely times where you're in a place and you're like, this place makes no sense to me. Like, it just doesn't read as a place. Mm-hmm. It reads as a gameplay space.
Yeah, totally.
And the Ishimura feels like a real place to me.
And well, thank you. And the same process happened with the necromorphs, where our initial designs and our first things were more alien and more just sort of like a pulp of textures and things like that.
You were going to say that, yeah.
And it only really locked in as something compelling once we dialed that way back and left a lot of humanity in them.
Yeah.
And then there was a certain amount of pathos to it, and a little bit that was much more horror. Because the thing is scary aliens have existed forever. And so making a scary alien actually wasn't that scary. It was only when you were like, oh man, I can see who that was.
Yeah.
Then it was much more sort of visceral in its impact. And so same idea, where you're trying to sort of show in the enemy design what it was before it got turned into this, and that became much more compelling as a final result.
So speaking of a place that seems like a real place, Rosie mentioned in a which we wanted to ask you about, and she didn't. I think we told her that you might come on, so but she didn't know that you were coming on when she mentioned this. You did an art Bible for the franchise that was broken down. She said she has a strong memory of this because it really was sent to her a great way to break it down. That broke down the art tile sets essentially into sort of a urban planning kind of manner, where
Mm-hmm.
you have each district of type of living spaces that humans have. Can you talk a little bit about that art Bible and sort of like how, I don't know if it sounds like maybe you did it after Dead Space One and that was something for the whole
For
franchise, but
two, no, it was a combination. I did one for Dead Space 1, and then we evolved it. Definitely for Dead Space 2, we wanted to bring in a lot more environmental variety because we
yeah,
did feel there was a certain visual fatigue in the first game after all that time.
right,
And so we definitely went further. The idea was with the Art Bible was to sort of break things down because you got a whole team of people that, again, I don't want to waste their time, and they are going to be developing stuff on their own. And, how do you help give them some guardrails? So we took the idea of the gameplay, and there was various sorts of things. But number one, we wanted it to be very immersive and relatable, right? If our overriding goal is to be scary, if you remember that it's a video game, that's not going to work. So that's where the whole diegetic UI came from.
yeah, that
Was to
one of my next
not put
questions.
anything. Well, we'll get to that in a second then. And then, right? And the thing with sci-fi and spaceships is there's a lot of sci-fi games, right? So we wanted people to understand that this is a horror game first. And so it had to be very grounded and relatable. So I did a lot of sort of looking at, okay, what are structures and what are things that are very relatable? So I came onto Gothic churches because there was a whole language of visual motifs, but one of the things about Gothic churches is you can really see how they're held up because of the buttresses and the pillars. You're like, oh, I get this, right? There's a pillar there, there's a wall, and then this outside thing that holds the wall up. Okay, cool. So one of our visual motifs was Gothic churches and specifically how they're held up, because
That makes
even though it's
so much sense. I'm sorry to interrupt, but like,
yeah, no, that's the idea, right? Because I wanted people to look at this, because a spaceship is really easy to make some kind of cheating architecture where it's like a big cantilever or just a thing, and it's polygons, so they won't fall down on you. And so I was like, no, lots of pillars, lots of buttresses, lots of arches, things that hold the world up, and so you just sort of believe it at a certain level. And then the other one was, this is a game with a lot of single point high key light sources and that move around. So we wanted interesting surfaces for light to play across. So that's where all the ribbing comes from, because it creates interesting shadows. If you pan a light across a ribbed surface, it creates these sort of sawtooth shadows and that kind of stuff. So ribbing, that was another visual motif. And then let me see. And then it was negative space, right? Something, because panning a light across a surface, if it's a big flat, or if it's a big wall, or if it's a big flat surface, we needed space, like negatives and rhythm, where it's like, okay, there's something in the near midground, there's something in the middle midground, there's something in the midground, there's something in the background. And as you move, those things all parallax and create visual interest. Because again, this is a game with not a lot of enemies in it. You're going to walk around, pan a light around, and be like, what's that? What's that? And you're going to walk, not run. So a world with a lot of layers to it kind of worked well in terms of that. So negative space was another visual motif. And all these things add up to a place that's fun to walk around slowly and pan a flashlight, even if nothing happens. But but then the issue was, all this is going to create a big visual mess if we whatever. So the last two rules were nothing medium sized. It's either giant, or detail is either big or small. So it's a lot of big shapes with a lot of tiny details on it, and then nothing in between. because that's helped it stay readable. And then the last one was circles. Again, kind of coming from Gothic churches and the rose window, where if you get a lot of these dagger triangles and stuff like that, putting a lot of circles on it then was like a nice round break from all these other sorts of things. So if you took negative space, pillars, circles, dense repeating detail and ribs, that's the sort of Dead Space visual Bible stuff. And then I gave that to all the concept artists and all the environment artists as like here's sort of a place to start from. If honest, I think we kind of overdid it. And that's why over time, over Dead Space, you're like, is this a hospital? Because, it's a lot of ribs and negative space, and it's like a Gothic church hospital. Yeah. And you're like, okay. So it did have a real identity, which was nice. But over time, I think it became a bit oppressive. And we lightened up for Dead Space 2.
Yeah, interesting. Oh, awesome. A great breakdown. So yeah, can you...
Go ahead.
No, I was gonna transition into the UI and the diegetic nature of the
Sure,
game too.
Sure.
But yeah.
I mean, no, that was basically the core idea, which was if you remind people, nothing is gamier than UI and a HUD, and the more you remind people that it's just a game, the more they're gonna kind of be detached from the mood, and the mood is really a big part of the gameplay. So, what can we do to make everything live in the world and to break the sort of zero plane of the HUD? So we were like, let's try to avoid that at all costs. And it was hard because there's a lot of, that's people have been trained a certain way, and and how do you get that information in front of people? But again, one of the first things I did is I took a clip from Texas Chainsaw Massacre and played it for everybody, and then I put a HUD on it and played it for everybody. And and it was sort of, it made the point in a really obvious way, like, oh, I'm not scared anymore because there's like a target reticule and an ammo counter on top of this movie, and I'm like, it's not scary anymore. So and then from there it was like, the decisions were pretty obvious, honestly. I mean, an ammo counter on the gun, that had been done before. And then putting the thing on his back, although it had some side effects, like he's got a real hunchy pose. And that was almost entirely to sort of surface the UI to the player of like, we got to keep his back upright. We got to keep his arm out. If you actually look from a third person perspective at what Isaac's doing, it is pretty terrible. And people have commented.
Yeah, it looks pretty uncomfortable
on his posture, but that's because he's showing you the health. Look at my back. Look at the health and ammo. And the other big thing that became an art rule was in a warm world. So, right, we expressly wanted, again, because we were nervous that people were going to think this was a sci-fi game when they saw the screenshots and the trailer. We were like, no, this is a horror game first. So it's a very warm world because horror movies tend to have a warm, decaying color palette, and sci-fi movies tend to have a blue Terminator type of color palette. So we knew it was a warm world, and specifically kind of an ochre brick orange kind of thing. We needed the UI to really pop. So that's why it's the color that it is, because it's the complementary color to the orange of the world. So it pops the most, and nothing ever in the world is that color that his health bar is, or that the ammo counter is, because then your eye can sort of dip to it, and there's no like hologram or something else that's the same color, unless it's interactable, which is there's a color theory behind how everything. But of course, it's pretty basic color theory. So the thing that happened to us was a year before we came out, that sort of orange teal, color palette, a lot of movies do it and everything like that. August of 2007 was our Game Informer cover and our first announce. And, the cover's got Isaac surrounded by everybody and all that kind of stuff. And he's looking kind of clunky, but no one knows it. And he's orange and whatever. But also in August of 2007, Bioshock comes out. And the Big Daddy is a clunky, rusty guy in the exact same color palette. And people, it took a while for people. I think now those two IPs have sort of been extricated from each other, but it took a while. At first, everybody thought we were a Bioshock ripoff at first. And it's just sort of like, people don't understand how long games take to make. And I was like, do you think we just did this? Like, how does that? But it's also like, I was just going, well, that's basic. They also know color. And so they chose color for that same reason. And that's just how it worked. And here we are. But
yeah, contrasting Big Daddy with the
right.
water and the ocean.
The other thing that happened with the UI is like one of the hardest things we ever did was the map. So the map is a real-time 3D map presented on a plane in the world that is his UI, right? Is his menu. And you can tumble the map within, but you can also tumble the camera. What a nightmare. And late in the deal, I can't remember whose idea it was. I wish I could give them credit, but it certainly wasn't mine. But someone came up with the breadcrumb idea of how to.
Yeah, I was going to ask about this.
Right.
I remember you mentioning it.
It's so good, and it uses the AI path nodes that had already been placed in the world to help the necromorphs walk around, and it just pings the closest AI path node, and then traces and lights up the path nodes to wherever your current goal is. And we were worried it was going to. It was controversial because we thought people were just going to look at the ground and follow the breadcrumbs through the game. But it turned out to be so effective to players. And the map was such a nightmare. And the map got, we spent, I don't know, 10x more work on the map than we did the breadcrumb trail. And then for Dead Space 2, we were like, do we even need the map? Can people just use the trail? And so we just didn't do the map again because it was so hard to actually do
that. I mean, that 10x, versus the revelation of that breadcrumb. That's a great dev story there too. Just like how sometimes we just get so fixated on we need a map or we need this, and it was like we're gonna make it work. And then it was like
it's my favorite. It's my favorite part of game development. I'm sorry to talk over you, but it's my favorite part of game development is that sort of 3/5 done phase, maybe 4/5 done, where the game starts to make an argument for what it wants to be and what it is. And it goes, yeah, I know you meant for this, but this is what is actually happening. And you talked a little bit about the cohesiveness of it, Brett. That was a big part of what I learned too, was to be humble in the face of what you intended to make versus what you actually made, and how to then pivot and make what you actually made as good as it can be. And there was a lot of times where the diplomacy came back into it towards the end, where we would play through, and every room, despite what we thought we were making, what is this room actually about now as you play it and as you see it? And there were a lot of times where we would take, and mostly it was about removing something that people had worked pretty hard on. But going, actually now it's about, like, I can remember there's a hallway in Dead Space 2 that has this giant animated billboard. It's in the subway. And this animated billboard, God, I was madly in love with it. And it wasn't, Ben had made it, and I was like, man, this room is now all about this billboard. It's so exciting and it looks great. And what we need to do is turn off every other light but this billboard and really make it sing. And then we need to spawn all the bad guys on the other end of the billboard and have them walk towards you across through its light. And so we completely, one person makes an animated billboard VFX, and we completely changed the combat in the room based late in the game based on the billboard. Right. And how it had redefined what that room was about. And we went through the whole game like that, and just had to have the courage. And not everybody came out of each of those equations on the upside, right? People worked really hard on the combat that was in there before that billboard. But now, sorry, that's what it's about. We gotta be humble in the face of that, and that's not always possible. But it was a good lesson.
Amazing. Thank you, Ian. We don't have to spend too much time on it, but I think it's a pretty unique, if I can completely change topics.
Sure.
And kind of talk about, obviously you went on to do more Dead Space and other stuff and lots of great stuff. And then now you've transitioned over into film and TV. And in pre-show, you talked a little bit about just sort of like the contrasting, nature of those things. And we don't have a lot of, I mean, we have some, but oftentimes it's people coming from that arena coming into games. And in my experience, and not a lot go the other direction. But what has that? I just think because people are going to be interested to know, like, what has that transition been for you? And and have you brought game development in with you? It sounds like maybe you have somewhat.
100%. It's been an incredible sort of career evolution and very gratifying, and it's so much fun to learn all these new things and be around all these incredible craftspeople. So for those who don't know, I'm now a virtual production supervisor at ILM, and I work with their stagecraft system. A lot of people learned about it from The Mandalorian, which I was the virtual production supervisor on the first season. And the idea, right, is this: it's a stage. Basically, imagine if a whole film could get made inside a game level and inside your monitor. So a whole stage, in this case, the one, we make them different sizes, but these things are, the Mando one is about 75 feet across by 90 feet long with a whole ceiling, thousands of LEDs in a seamless package. And we can put enough computers together to be powerful enough to render the world photorealistically in real time, and then change the perspective of the world based on the camera to hold up. Real projection has been a movie gag for decades. That's not new. But the ability but you were very limited in how you could move the camera. Well, now by using real time, game engines and our own engine that we use at ILM, we can, as the different cameras moves, we can draw a window that then creates a perfect perspective match, and we can seamlessly extend the set. And the bigger part, honestly, is getting the photorealistic lighting on all the characters and on the world. So yeah, it's been an amazing thing, and I lead the team on set. And what really has been gratifying is, it turns out that a lot of what I was learning to do as an art director in games still applies, where the timeline is just vastly shrunk. Instead of playing out over the course of years, it plays out over the course, in some cases, of seconds or minutes. But that idea of working with a diverse group of people that are incredible craftspeople who may or may not understand what we're trying to accomplish, but don't necessarily need to. They just need to we all need to work together to accomplish this. And there's a lot of defending the artwork, just like games. Movies frequently look a bit not that great until suddenly they look good at the end. And there's a lot of people that panic along the way, like, oh my God, is that going to look good enough by the time we're done? And it's frequently my job to keep the train on the tracks and just be like, yes, I promise it'll look good. And to work with a director of photography or a director or a production designer to understand their visual goals, to make sure that our work lands where it needs to. So just like a lead designer or an engineer has here is how, right? Like Dead Space, it was about executing fine motor things under stress, kind of like in the horror movie, putting the keys in the car. And it's like, right, and you're under stress, but you have to do fine adjustment. It's not a spray and pray game. It's a dismemberment, quick little. And it's having a long relationship with an enemy. Well, in this, they'll present me with some visual problems that we need to solve, and just like we were like, okay, well, here's how the art is going to support that idea, Mr. Designer. In this case, it's okay, production designer, okay, DP. You need this to feel lonely, or we need to be able to control this, and how do we make this world and shape it in real time to accomplish those goals? So it's been great working with all these and being able to diagnose visual problems real quick. Like a fun example was we were working on a show, and it was a big blue sky in the background, and the actors were seeing standing in front of the big blue sky. But they were kind of in shadow, but you didn't know why they were in shadow. And it turns out there was a big balcony above them, but no shot showed that balcony. So when we got to our shot, and it's sort of people that were kind of flat lit and a little dark in front of a blue sky, it was, oh, well, this looks fakey. It doesn't look right. And we were trying to adjust a bunch of stuff. And it turned out, but there was no shot. We couldn't suddenly like pan the camera up and show the balcony that was above them. That's dumb. And I don't control the camera, so I can't do that. But it turned out the answer was to add a cloud in the sky. Not a big one, just a tiny cloud off in the distance. And obviously that cloud was not shadowing where we were over these people. But your eye suddenly went, oh, there's clouds every once in a while. There must be another cloud above them. I just can't see it. And it all suddenly worked. The magic trick worked again. And so that kind of visual problem solving, being fast in the moment, and coming up with, in some cases, the solution that you can do rather than the ideal solution that maybe if you could go back 6 months, you could go. All that came from game development.
Yeah,
and it's been fun. It's been fun to do it. And similarly, on a stagecraft set, what's been amazing has been we're a team working together in a lot of stress and a high stakes environment, and you learn what the people are great at, and you learn, oh, so and so is really great under pressure. So and so is really able. So and so's got an incredible eye, and you learn how to call on people and to give them space and permission to do great work and not expect them to do everything, and all that kind of how to cast a team for success and to build together so they can execute. That all came from games too. We just do it on a tight little timeline. So yeah, it's been amazing, and we've gotten to work on some great projects, and it's just the start of that work, and it's fun to, I don't know. Especially in game development, especially as games have gotten so big and need to appeal to everyone on the planet at a top budget level. I mean, if you're spending $200 million, your game has to appeal to everyone ever. To be on films or to be working on a bunch of different stuff where someone just comes to us and goes, hey, I've got a pirate movie. How would you do this if you were doing it where you had to, make it look like they were all out on the ocean? And to just solve one problem over the course of a few weeks rather than a million problems over the course of 6 years has been really rejuvenating. And of course, enjoying games as just a fan has been good too.
Amazing.
Wow. That was fantastic.
Thank you.
That was absolutely, absolutely amazing. Thank you for describing all of that for us. Wow. Tim, I quit. I'm going to work on stagecraft, I guess.
Hey, come on out to the water's fine. And, what's been fun, of course, has been.
Hey, wait a second. What?
The game development, and especially the pre-production of movies now, there's a lot more crossover and a lot of stuff, and developing these sets, and whether or not it actually gets filmed with stagecraft or done more traditionally or done whatever, the virtual art departments that are developing are very similar to white boxing and prototyping game levels and all that kind of stuff. It's just, instead of a player, it's a camera crew, but you're figuring out how they can get in there and do stuff, and we're using Unreal and a bunch of other tools to sort of make that all happen. Things are coming together.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Wow, what a great and it's so applicable to Dead Space. I think that transition too, because we talk so much about lighting and problem solving and the details, and so it's like it's interesting. Yeah. Well, thank you, Ian.
And it's and it's timely because they're doing it again. I want to wish good luck to everybody working on obviously all my old teammates that are all working on their own projects all everywhere. But in the team that's doing the Dead Space remake, they seem to be really applying a lot of love to it, and yet giving themselves permission to do things differently and evolve and try stuff. So I want to double down on that permission. I've had zero to do with it, and that is not there's no sour grapes in there. That's how I'd like it, because they deserve the chance to take their own swing, and I'm really looking forward to their results.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. Yeah, if you were following it and stuff, and and I'm sure there's a little bit of it's an honor to have a game like that be remade, and have that sort of that service put.
It's a weird honor. I feel old. I didn't realize I had reached the sort of remake portion of my career, but here we are.
Yeah, here we are. Yep, it's on all of our minds these days. Well, thank you, Ian. This has been wonderful. Thank you so much for spending your time with us. And yeah, hopefully it's not so long that we get to see each other someday.
Absolutely. Thanks, Brett. Thanks, Tim.
All right. Cheers.
Thanks, everybody.
Welcome back from the break. A little production note for you here. While sometimes you hear these little breaks in their 30 seconds, for me it's been 3 days. So apologies if like my direct quoting of Ian is a little off because I have not had a chance to listen back to the conversation. But it was a great one. We could have gone on for quite a while.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, I was hoping that he would give us some insights into things that we were very curious about during the series, and that proved to be true. I think, I know I had some conversations with him over the years since the game shipped, and there were some anecdotes that I would hope would come up, and he blew away expectation. Thank you, Ian. As far as like how much depth and how much memory he had, and and clearly like passionate about that project and remembers a lot, fondly about all the stuff that they went through. So yeah, it was really good. I thought it was wonderful. Just really, really thorough and humorous. He's a good personality too. So
yeah, for sure. I mean, I really liked, one of the things that you say, this is another behind the scenes sort of thing, is that the team makes the game, and he sort of took his team and what they could do, and use those elements and figured out how to blend them, pulling in from, in some cases, like, okay, this is too out there in the case of the necromorphs, but there's something there, right? And taking the specific people that he had, and constructing the ship that those people would make, rather than coming up and saying, well, it has to be this, and this is what the necromorphs are. Like, he was basically saying, I'm curating the good work, of these people who work for me, and pulling out the stuff that will, cut over to the audience that we need to reach. I thought that was, that's the job of an art director right there.
Yeah, for sure. And he talked, I think he talked well about his strengths and weaknesses too, right? About where, so to echo what you're saying, but in a slightly different way, that it was not only just finding the, what his team can do, but also where he can help most, versus other places, and letting them do their thing. And at the same time, like when he went through sort of the boundaries or rules, when he kind of talked about like ribbing and like these little things, or like as soon as he said Gothic cathedrals, I was like, of course. Like, and I never would have thought of it, but it's like, weirdly, I get it, and those sorts of like little tidbits that help guide a team to still let the team do what they, are best at and what they want to do, but within sort of like a sort of like sandbox kind of thing. So,
yeah. I mean, and also, considering technical limitations and what their engine could do well, like using the deferred lighting, and like, okay, that's going to really work well for these sorts of things, but not these other things. So let's just not do those things that won't look good, right? And we talk about that a lot, often in terms of design. Especially for you with the, between camera and level, meeting those things together and saying like, look, your camera can't do this, then don't do that. Right. He's doing the same thing, but with the technical limitations of the engine and the, machines at the time and shader languages and what have you. Lighting techniques in particular, there's some that he really dwelled on. And I was like, oh, thank goodness. Right. I mean, because, as we get to a point in technical development where those limitations are less and less. I think we need to make the choices more and more to some degree, and decide that we're going to do those things and make our own limitations. Because I think that you can see in certain games that are definitely of a time, they seem to transcend that time pretty well. This is generally true. There's some movies like that too. Like Tron, for example, is an old movie that still actually holds up remarkably well, with like one exception, which is like this animated segment they did that I think they just ran out of time to do something better with the grid bugs. But in general, like that movie still looks kind of amazing. And you look and you're like, that was 1985 or something. And so this game, Dead Space, I think looks, fantastic. Still holds up really, really well. I think that like No One Lives Forever 2 especially looks really, really good because they kind of understood their limitations and spent textures in the right places and things like that. And there are definitely other games that we've played that I think hold up really well over time, because they managed the technical, what the technical constraints were really well through art direction. And those games end up looking really, really good for years, decades. And that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So, and that is down in part to Ian, certainly, and his team. So really cool interview. Anything else you want to talk about before we move on to the last bit of production business for the year?
No.
Okay. Cool. All right. Well, then our last bit of production business for the year is that next week will be our last episode of the year. We're going to do a little end of year retrospective as we normally do. I'm sure we'll probably pull in some quotes from Ian and from Rosie the week before. But also we had a few other interviews, not as many this year, I think. So we will hopefully get those ideas in. But that's your homework, Tim, is to start listening to those episodes or checking back through your notes.
Yeah.
I always listen through them on like 2x so that I can blaze through and be like, oh yeah, I remember this and I'll write it down. So, and then we kind of stitch that all together with some choice quotes. If you have questions you want to throw into that or your own retrospectives on the year, shoot us an email at devgameclub@gmail.com. We don't have an email to read this week, but it'd be cool to have some for that end of year thing next week. Short notice, I know. You can find us on the web at devgameclub.com or on Twitter at devgameclub, where you can also find my co-host at
Tim Longo Jr. with the JR at the end.
Be warned, we may soon be moving primarily to Discord. We haven't talked about dropping Twitter entirely, but I think there's a general fear that we may not have a choice, that it may just go away someday at the rate that thing is sort of degrading. But we'll see if we do it, pull the trigger earlier. So look for an announcement from us on that in the near future. You can also find Tim streaming at twitch.tv/Tim Longo Jr. at the JR at the end, where he continues to wrestle with what is this? I'm checking my notes here. Dark Souls?
Specifically Artorias of the Abyss, the Abyss Walker. I think I spent almost all of this week's session fighting just him for 2 hours.
Wow.
Yeah.
Nice.
So it's pretty hilarious. Watch the VOD. Calamity kept track of how many hits I got each run, and so when it would go up and when it would go down. And we know how many hits I need to make based on math, and so he would be like 15 out of 53, 10 out of 53. It's like, oh, okay. So I don't know what I'm going to do, to be honest, because I did, yeah. For the stream, watch if you want to.
Yeah. Our intro and outro music was written and performed by Kirk Hamilton, commissioned by friend of the cast, Aaron Evers, and our logo, of course, is by Mark Garcia, who also set up a wonderful merch store for us, from which I recently purchased a backpack, which I thoroughly enjoy. But you can find that link on our Twitter bio. It's the reply to the pinned tweet. Have fun remembering that there's always Peng this week, and good night.
Good night.